this report is really a global pulse. And it's based on, as Max said and Josh said, the SAY assessment, which has over 100,000 people in the database and people from 126 countries who have taken the SAY and contributed their EQ results to this database. From that large normed database, this report extracted about 13,000 in a random sample. The sample was balanced across the different regions, balanced by gender, balanced by age. So we're really getting a very representative sample of the entire SAY database to support the data that we're going to be looking at today. Josh, anything to add about the foundation of this report? Because it's very powerful.
No, just to say this big data methodology of looking at a huge data set using this random sampling protocol creates a very balanced way to look at data. A lot of research that's done in the world is like, a group of college students. This is a very large group of people, as you said, from 126 countries, and they're primarily people in the workplace because it's from the data that all of our practitioners around the world that are using the assessment primarily are using it in the workplace. And so we have a professional sample of primarily working adults from 126 countries. I think we can say this is the first time such a broad and powerful perspective on emotional intelligence been taken in the world.
So let's put the what we're going to discuss today about business in a little context. And this is, one of the primary findings of the report, and one that is cause for concern. That we see from the first time that we measured this back in 2011, there has been a steady decline in global emotional intelligence. Steady. The trajectory is pretty uniform, but heading inexorably in that direction. Now has fallen slightly below that score of 100, which is the normed middle score for the assessment. Any comments about the context from the panel before we look at some of the business implications?
I think, as we said on the previous, that we're living in times of chaos and complexity, and both of these create huge amounts of stress. And as our database is, a great strength of our database is from people in the workplace. I think we can see that this is something that's being reflected. Is that I'm not surprised to see this.
I think that as you think about the workplace that's becoming increasingly requiring collaboration. In Max and my newest book, The Vital Organization, we talked about this new approach to management. We see a lot of companies saying, we need innovation. And in order to have innovation, we have to have collaboration. Companies are increasingly global in their supply chain, in their markets, and in their personnel. So we have people working across boundaries, across regions. We have people increasingly working virtually. And all of that requires emotional intelligence. So the fact that emotional intelligence is going down, I think, has a very serious threat to the future of business.
Yeah, I think this is an unpleasant slide. Unfortunately, it's not a surprise. And I think it's something scary, because if considering the impact of EQ on the business results, this is a call for action, really, for companies.
Yeah, if we go back to the 40, is it 44, 48%, Josh, you shared was at the beginning.
44
44.
times.
44 times, yeah.
Yep.
And then we look at this, then, as you say, Max, serious cause for concern.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if what we found is that people who score above average on emotional intelligence are 44 times as likely to be high in the success factors, like effectiveness and relationships, that's really critical as a component for creating performance in an organization. If you need effectiveness in relationships and health and quality of life, you're going to absolutely need emotional intelligence.
And I think for those of us in the business world, that reinforces the need for data. We can't make any decisions about what to do, how to improve our professional development, how to improve our leadership training, how to improve our attracting and selecting people to hire. If one, we don't know about these trends, and two, we don't know about the potential impact of selecting people, cultivating people with high EQ, and working with others to enhance their EQ. It's the way that we're going to transform the organizations that we're involved with.
Just two comments from the chat. Yoshi, why is this trend not surprising? I think as we look at the headlines, as we look at what's going on in the world, we're seeing this. And I think that increasing pressure is pushing EQ down.
And by the way, for 6 seconds, it means you need to speed your way to 1 million.
Get on that curve.
Huge opportunity here.
Yeah.
As we know, optimism is a key EQ component. So let's look at some of the trends and perhaps things that we can focus on as strengths to build on. This slide is actually showing what's changed in terms of the talents that are growing. Tommaso, you've joined us.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk about the brain apps a little bit?
Yeah, so we have a model that is composed by 18 different apps divided in 3 main areas. The first area is focus, and you can see the ones in blue are in that area. And we have the one in red are on the decision area, and the one in green are on the drive area. So on this chart, we see a representation of each one of those a little bit. It's interesting to take that into consideration. Especially one thing that caught my eye is that adaptability and reflection are the 2 ones that are growing the most, even though the percentage is not huge, but they are both on the evaluative side. So it means that we are thinking, maybe we are doing a lot of thinking and less acting as proactivity is going down.
Yeah, interesting.
But if we think back to the previous slide where you see, EQ going down year on year, and then you look at the apps that are diminishing here, one of the highest shrinking apps is collaboration.
Yes.
So again, people are sitting back on the evaluative side, not taking risks to jump in, collaborate, and get things done. And, if you consider the world that we're in, we need people to work together. We need them to take action, and sometimes to take risks. So it's really concerning for me to see those 3 as having significantly diminished over the year.
It's interesting to see such a trend toward caution on the side that is declining. Hesitancy to collaborate, perhaps not trusting other people in being willing to collaborate, and proactivity declining. That signals concerns with innovation, creativity, perhaps some concern about starting new ventures and being entrepreneurial, and then risk tolerance. That's the cutting edge in business. Requires that we embrace risk to some extent, that we can manage it, but we have to tolerate some risk, or change won't happen.
So if you think of the state of the global economy at the moment, more people are pausing and not being prepared to proactively take risks because there's too much risk out there already.
Yeah.
Well, and I was going to point out, Max is in a economic environment that's, contracting, and businesses are really in a place of struggle. And I imagine that these three that are going down, you're probably seeing even more in an economy like Italy's right now. Is that true, Max?
Well, yes and no at the same time. Let me explain. This slide is so clear about the risk for innovation. We all know we are in a VUCA time.
Mm-hmm.
And
define that, Max, for those who might not know.
Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It's a military acronym for these four factors.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see collaboration, proactivity, and risk tolerance, of course, it's the foundation of innovation. Because nowadays, in a complex world, if we want to innovate, we need to stay together and collaborate. We need to start by our own ideas and so on. We need proactivity. We cannot wait for a manager who says, you have to do this kind of task. And the risk tolerance for innovation is mandatory because, of course, innovation is a way to take risk, to go in uncertainty way versus the nowadays world. So the world we know exactly how that's worked. So it's a real challenge. And what I'm seeing in my old works with companies is that the real risk is to see now people who are stuck and are in the middle of nowhere and without a vision and without a direction. And so I'm saying, yes, I see this kind of trend every day. The risk I see is not only about Italy and Europe, but it's a global trend, as our data said. And so I see an economy side, but a political side that create a real complex environment for people who wants to do something different and be the owner of the future. On the other side, I'm quite pleased by the idea to see more people who try to take a pause, to reflect, to adapt, and to design a different future. Unfortunately, the intensity of this growth is not so high. And probably this is what we need to push and what we need to, in some way, teach and talk with people about, because we have the opportunity to train emotional intelligence. We have the opportunity to train and improve our apps, but we need to know how. And by the way, we need to understand why. So I see a real clear danger. At the same time, I see an opportunity because we know that these kind of apps are trainable and are something we can improve. So I don't want just to underline what's wrong. I want to, at the same time, say, okay, guys, we can do it. If we are aware of the situation, if we know how to do it and why we have to do it. And I think these three questions are absolutely clear.
And Josh, I think earlier in the chat there was someone mentioning about top-down leadership, the real old-fashioned organizational structure. And, we see that a lot in the Middle East, where people are very protective of their positions. So there is a lack of collaboration. I was talking to one of the preferred partners who's doing a big project today, and it's all about me and my job and keeping that safe. So, there's the lack of collaboration. Proactive, I just want to be safe. I can't risk anything because, there's a billion people waiting for my job. So, well, I can see those three apps that are decreasing just based on that one conversation this morning.
Well, and if I am I mean, I can speak for myself. When things start feeling out of control for me, I'm much more likely to get into that top-down mode.
Yeah.
Directive mode.
And if you think of some of the elements of servant leadership and, you know, the sort of the opposite of a top-down approach, it's encouraging collaboration, encouraging initiative, and, you know, tolerating risk from
Absolutely.
your team, right? That sort of define the new leader.
From a rational point of view,
sorry, go ahead.
that's correct. The reality, in my opinion, is that nowadays we are in an amygdala state. And so the risk is to be reactive instead of proactive. But because rationally, the story is absolutely clear. The point is that when you feel fear and so on, the risk is to try to protect yourself and then react to the situation and go to the old schemas and so patterns. And so the risk is to think that the solution is to have more command and control instead of the servant leadership or the collaboration between people and so on. So the real risk right now is to go on the opposite of the right solution.
Yeah, the old mindset.
Navigating emotions, the competence that is declining the most. That makes sense with what Max was saying.
Navigating emotions is the competency that's declined the most.
Yeah.
And that's the competency that allows us to, okay, yes, I'm stressed. Yes, this is chaotic. Yes, it's scary. And also I'm going to use that to help me move forward in a positive way.
Jayne, I think you had a comment.
No, I was just thinking back on a conversation this morning with one of the dynamic learning senior consultants, and the three things that she was talking about in terms of that middle layer of management was the need for them to pull together, be more proactive, and taking, and being allowed the space to talk and to do things without having rigorous controls put on them, and collaborate, take risks, be prepared to stand up. But it's not happening because everybody's at that fear.
Yeah.
So I can tell you want to move on, Paul. I just had one very quick point, which is this is one of the reasons why organizations that are actually using emotional intelligence and creating a culture and building these skills, that's why they are doing so well. And we're seeing more and more and more research that says, individual leaders with these capabilities, those same capabilities that are declining, those who are choosing to increase it, they are standing out as incredibly valuable contributors, and their organizations are doing better when they focus on, collaboration and proactivity and risk tolerance.
And it really is a cultural issue for organizations to support leaders who want to be that way, to reward genuine participation from everybody in the organization. It's a major cultural transformation, but one that is very promising. Great. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and look at something else that we discovered when we analyzed the data comparing employees to managers to senior executives. And this is it's a very interesting slide in which we can see actually as people move up that career path, the people in the most senior group actually have a higher average EQ than the managers, and in turn the managers have higher total EQ than the employee group. And there's also some really distinguishing factors here in terms of the different EQ competencies that differentiate the groups. Would anyone like to comment on this?
It's interesting to see the noble goal. It's really something that it's important for both the comparison among employee and management and executives. It's some kind of knowing where you want to go. It's such a differentiator in terms of the work that you can do.
Josh, tell us, define noble goal for the folks who are not intimately familiar with the 6 seconds model, because it has real meaning.
Yeah, so pursuing a noble goal is about seeing that long-term sense of purpose. What is it that you want to be contributing in the world? What is your legacy? And then pursuing it means putting it into action in our daily lives. So people who pursue noble goals from a leadership perspective, it's not just your mission, it's your whole life. It's that sense of why, what is it that you want to add into the world? And how do you do that at home? How do you do that at the grocery store? How do you do that at the office?
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you this compass of, as Max talked about that why are you going to make the choices you make? And when that sense of purpose is so clear, it catalyzes you to be able to handle a lot more complexity because you know there's something really important you're working toward.
And by the way, one of the factors that impact more on motivation is purpose. And for managers, if they want to create purpose, they need, of course, to work on the why questions and so on the noble goals.
As someone from Dynamic Learning added in the chat, it's really about your legacy, something that may even extend, beyond your lifetime. So this is a really, I think, special element of what we look at in terms of our EQ model. But there's some other commonalities here, and I wondered if anyone would like to comment on.
What I'm really interested to see here, Paul, is that exercise optimism is a differentiation between employer and manager. And then the manager and the senior executive, you've got intrinsic motivation. The other two are the same. So the managers are the problem solvers. They're the one who's taking this perspective of hope and possibility and solve problems, because that's what optimists do. And then the senior executives have that intrinsic motivation, that internal fire that comes from pursuing a noble goal. And they are proactive. So the senior executives are proactively pursuing the vision, and then the managers are having to find the solutions to get them there. So I just thought that was really interesting.
That's great. Yeah. Well, beautiful analysis.
So,
and they all have to know, and the managers particularly have to navigate their emotions in order to do
it looks like everyone needs to do that.
Yeah. Well, and they're in order, right? So the biggest differentiator is exercise optimism.
Yeah.
So if you're an employee, you want to become a manager, this is a learnable skill. All of these are learnable skills. So the other implication here that's great is we say EQ is important for success, right? And if you consider getting promoted part of success, well, guess what? We can see in this graph that EQ is one of the contributors to your career advancement.
Yeah. And think about optimism in that context. An employee who strives to get to the next level, has that sense of possibility that they get from optimism, and then they take advantage of that optimism to move up. And then, as Jayne was saying, to go the next level, it takes sort of another level of fire in the belly to get from that management role into the senior ranks.
If we see Liana from Dynamic Learning has written about optimism being a learnt response, and again I see it in the tiered organizational structures that we're familiar with in this part of the world. They're very, very enforced tiered structures, and managers are having to learn to be optimistic because it's a key part of resilience. So, every time they get knocked down, they need to find that optimism to stand up again and find an alternative way of doing things. In other words, to pursue that vision that they have and that perhaps they're being directed towards.
Any final comments about this slide? I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, just one about navigate emotion. And navigate emotions is one of the key competence for collaboration. So we can say that our leaders have this kind of competence. They need to use it. And they need to have the opportunity to practice about that because they have it.
Yes.
Good point, Max.
This slide is showing us the differences in total EQ are across the sectors that we identified. some perhaps counterintuitive, but very interesting results on this slide. Any thoughts or comments?
Well, the IT and telecom is probably easy to understand. In the part of the world where I am, in Silicon Valley, the emphasis is on being IQ smart. Hiring people who are great coders, who are, often treat people really badly, but they're a rock star, and so we're gonna promote them and we're gonna pay them a boodle of money, and without looking at the kind of the toxic effect that has on collaboration and and what actually goes on in creating performance. It creates a real need for emotional intelligence in that sector, because it is increasingly a sector that's not about individual contributors. It's increasingly about creating real collaboration.
And I think, Josh, that possibly this might be showing some of the fruits of I mean 6 Seconds collective with key people in our network, the fruits of their labor. Because we have two very large, we have the first and the fourth logistics company in the world who are using emotional intelligence very, very strongly right across their organizations. So perhaps it's bearing fruit.
And I was just at FedEx in Memphis recently, and they really are committed to being a people-driven company. And we actually work with a couple of other logistics and transportation companies, and it's surprising. I mean, it seems counterintuitive. Like there's one company we work with, which is a trucking company, and their employees primarily sit in a truck by themselves, but they're deeply committed to emotional intelligence in that company, as they recognize that these individuals make their company work, and these individuals have the direct relationship with the customer. And it's all of their there's no great technology secret to making a trucking company different. So the differentiator is people. Whereas in IT, the differentiator is often, it is very much about IP as opposed to human P.
Right.
Sorry.
Any other quick examples, either Max or Jayne, from your parts of the world, people who are doing it right?
Well, not from my part of the world, but I think we are in a turning point, because even Google now with the project Oxygen and Aristotle, then in some way they underline the importance of EQ for their managers, and so I think we are really near to have as a mainstream idea that EQ is important for IT too. Working in the business school in Bologna, it's quite clear the trend of engineers that try to find others way to collaborate and to have the work done. So I think we are really near to a turning point right now.
So in this one, I'll just say, Paul, we looked at all of the sectors from the previous slide, and in the State of the Heart report that people can get from the website, it has all 8 of them. But for the slide, we just chose 4 to say, in this sector, those people who are high performers in terms of those outcomes we looked at before, effectiveness, relationships, well-being, quality of life, people who are scoring high in that, what are their top 3 talents? And quite interestingly, the top talents of high performers in these sectors is different in different sectors.
Fascinating.
So if you want to hire somebody to work in finance, and Max, I know you you have an interesting project you've done over the years with a private banking firm.
Yeah.
And so like as that private banking firm, if they want to hire people who are going to score high in those outcomes, they should hire people with these 3 capabilities.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting to see that there's a uniqueness for each company. So there's a uniqueness in terms of sector, but on the other side, in terms of company culture. In the case of the private banking firm, it's clear that noble goal, for instance, and intrinsic motivation are really important, but you have a cultural fit and there's an algorithm that can score this kind of cultural fit. And at the same time, you see that you have three competencies that impact more on the business results. And the second comment is, if you look at IT, imagination, risk tolerance, and collaboration, you can say that Google is right.
Well, I'll drive up there and let them know.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And I know from my background in healthcare that these three apps are on the money in terms of, prioritizing your time and scarce resources, working collaboratively with other people. So much, gets done in teams, and then mobilizing your imagination to come up with creative solutions to perhaps, seemingly unsolvable issues. It really hit home to me. So finally, if we look at it from the highest level, these are the killer apps that are going to account for a major part of the success factors that you see on the right-hand side. Would you orient us to this, Josh?
Yeah, so we talked about the idea that we have two assessments in this tool. One assessment is the stuff on the right. The other assessment is about EQ competencies and these apps or talents. And the question is, what of the talents today are most predictive of the things on the right? And this isn't a combination. This is three different ways of reaching the things on the right. So if you want the things on the right in your company, then any of these three very different pathways could be the most powerful ways to get there.
Well, I'm astonished about these three apps because when I think to what kind of education my little Richard, not so little now, is 12 years old, is getting, well, I need to ask more frequently to the teachers, what about entrepreneurship? What about imagination? What about modeling? Because these are the apps for the future, and in order to be successful in a very complex world. So it's a great way to maintain my focus on what is important, even in my family, not only in business, of course.
And Max, that's a great segue to the third and final webinar this morning, the focus of which is on education. And as you say, it all points towards where we have to start the process with our children. Jayne, any final comments?
Yeah, I just think that I think this combination of apps is incredibly powerful because you've got the entrepreneurship, which is about that vision and collaborating and inspiring and influencing people to join with you, the imagination to see where the possibilities lie, and then being able to model out how to get there. So I think they're wonderful. And just going back to Max's point, that these three apps are apps that are well embedded in 21st century skills that are coming in and being taught at school, or should be taught more of at school.
If you want to see a school that does this, visit Synapse, which is 6 Seconds Lab School. And you're welcome to come visit and come to Silicon Valley and see what it looks like.
And all the IT parents.
Yes.
Well, thank you, panelists, and thank you for joining us, everyone around the world. Go to the 6 Seconds website. You'll be able to download the full report. And please join us for the last webinar this morning. Jenny has put the link in, and the subject is EQ and education.